wisdom,
prudentia,
justice,
justitia,
temperance,
temperantia,
courage.
fortitudo.
Applying ancient philosophy to modern life, this is the Sunday Stoic.
Snags by telling people they're being recorded. Scott, you are being recorded. Yeah. This week on the Sunday Stoic podcast, we're joined by Scott Perry. Now, Scott, you have an interesting biography, and if I try to do it myself, I'll get it wrong. Would you mind introducing yourself today?
Not at all. So my name is Scott Perry. I am a husband, a father, and a teacher, and the creator and founder of a platform called Creative on Purpose, which I use as a publishing platform to broadcast a podcast broadcast live every week and to post to my blog every week. And the purpose of Creative on Purpose is to help people fly higher in endeavors that make a difference. Perhaps interesting to the people that are tuning in here, that particular venture began its life as something called the Stoic Guitarist, and then was for a short period of time called the Stoic Creative. I have a book out under that title, The Stoic Creative. And in addition to that, I'm also a coach in several of the online programs by Seth Godin, and I teach guitar lessons as my regular full-time gig.
So, for my listeners, when I was an undergrad, this was way back in the day. This is, 2002, 3, somewhere in there. I was interested in blues music. I play guitar a little bit, not professionally, but and I was getting into things like Robert Johnson and via Eric Clapton, the gateway drug, Eric Clapton into the blues for me, and then delving deeper and deeper. And I went to a blues bar that had opened up right around that time called the Blue Gator in Athens, Ohio, and saw this musician perform, and I was asking about his guitar, and if I remember, he told me it was a national resonator, and I thought, that's pretty cool. And I really enjoyed the sound, and I bought his CD, and I've listened to it ever since. Every now and again, I'm like, I want to hear this song or that song. There's a bunch of good ones on the album. I put it on my Google playlist too, so I could listen to it on my phone. I really liked the album, and then I was looking up Stoicism online, and I saw interviews with Massimo, with our guest today, Scott. And then I looked at his name, and I looked at the name of the artist on the CD, and they were the same, and I realized that it was the same guy. So Scott and I actually met once long ago. I was one of the many faces in the crowd. I remember Scott saying something along the lines of, there is literally hundreds of dollars to be made a year playing blues guitar. Something along these lines. I remember your stage banter a little bit there, but we have met once. You're the first guest I've actually met.
Well, when you connected with me by email and shared that with me, it is just amazing to me how even in a music career that is, really as small as mine, that the world is smaller, and it's somehow over the years I've connected with a lot of people that have seen me at one point or another in some smoky little crappy dive bar in some far flung location. So it's always, that my time as a professional musician, my career was actually like 35 years long that I performed more or less full time. And to no great acclaim, but I went into that endeavor just thinking, as long as I make enough today to get up and do this tomorrow, I'm going to do it. And I somehow managed to support a family of 4, and no regrets about any of that. And I had lots of great experiences, including the one at the Blue Gator. I don't know if you remember, but the guy that started that club was Terry Anderson, who was one of the hostages taken way back in the 80s during the hostage crisis that ended Jimmy Carter's career and began Ronald Reagan. So, and he was that was an interesting couple of conversations with Terry. So, life is rich, and I recall that night, and I recall you and your buddies in the audience. And yes, there are hundreds of dollars to be made in the blues music industry, and all I was doing was trying to get my fair share.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm sure Stoicism might help temper your expectations a bit with that as well. We'll get to that, I'm sure. But before we do, as you said, you had what, the Stoic guitarist. Was that the initial name of your what became what you have today, the Creative on Purpose? Is that the
Yeah, so that all came up. I've been a reader of the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius since I was in the 7th grade, and I'm happy to talk about how that happened. But I have always, I mean, that's a book that literally built me all the way through my young adult life and adult life, and definitely informs and inspires the way that I approach all of my work, musical and otherwise. The Stoic guitarist came about when I was in a program of Seth Godin's called the Alt MBA. And in that program, I decided that I wanted to start something new, and I wasn't exactly sure what that was going to be. I knew that I loved music and creativity, and I also had this lifelong enthusiasm and interest in Stoicism, ancient Stoic philosophy. So to start my venture, I just kind of threw those two together, and I literally just started blogging about anything, that came to mind, but always with the idea of talking about how Stoicism was helping me as not just a human being, but as a person making their way through the world in a musical life. And so that's how it began. And then through a series of other fortunate and sometimes unfortunate coincidences and circumstances, it evolved into the Stoic Creative, and then eventually Creative on Purpose.
Okay. So if I remember right from checking out some of your videos, as you said, you had a Latin course where you were translating, even though Marcus wrote in Greek. I took Latin also, and I can't remember for sure if we translated Marcus, but I was really into the not only the language but the history and the gods and goddesses and how all that mythology fit together. And so you had Latin class, you said, in seventh grade, and that's where you first found the meditations, correct?
Yeah. So I don't remember the exact circumstances.
Sure.
It might have been. So my Latin teacher was a classicist and was versed in both Latin and Greek, and he may very well have translated Marcus into Latin for us to then translate. But I remember translating those passages, and I was just completely struck by how the way that Marcus spoke to himself in his journal was exactly the way I spoke to myself in my journal and in my head. And I actually asked my teacher if I could have more passages to translate on my own, and he was very generous and did that for me. But he also gifted me his own personal copy of Meditations, and I borrowed it so many times that when I graduated from high school, he gave it to me as a graduation present. I don't think I think in all those years I had it on my desk far more often than he had it on his own.
It's amazing how a few of those teachers we have can really shape who we are over time. I teach all the time. I don't know if I have that much impact on too many people, but every once in a while there's someone who, after 5 years of education or whatever, they come back and say, "You were my favorite, and here's why." And it's like, oh, wow, I'll be remembered by that guy. Right. That's kind of impressive. But so how did Stoicism then, I came to know about it more just recently, the past few years. It would have been a great tool to have in the toolbox going through teenage years and dating and high school and college and whatever. Did those passages of Marcus come back into your mind during that part of your life?
Yeah, so there's I was commissioned to write an article for Stoicism Today, which is the blog for the modern Stoicism. And it sounds like you've had Massimo Pigliucci on your program.
Yeah.
So he's one of the members of Stoicism Today, or Modern Stoicism, as is Greg. I'm going to forget his last name now, but it's Greg that runs the blog and asked me to write an article about my journey through music as a musician, with Stoicism. So I've, if anybody's interested, you can just go to the blog and read the whole thing. But I mean, literally, Meditations is something I read at least annually for most of my life, and far more frequently since I've turned 50. I mean, those passages, there is so much in there that resonates with my life in general, but my life as a musician in particular. My very favorite passage of all is love the humble art that you have learned and take rest in it. And to me, Marcus is obviously talking about the art of living in that passage. But that is probably the number one passage that I remember and keep close to mind. So whenever I am feeling ungrateful or frustrated or anything else, that passage reminds me that music is the work that I get to do. It's not the work I have to do, and that it's a gift to be appreciated and shared, and not. I have no business being frustrated, angry, or bitter, jaded, or anything else. About my journey. It's I'm just where I'm supposed to be is another thing that Stoicism teaches us, and I am where I am, and I get to decide now how I frame that and decide what to do next.
I will say, as a amateur musician, that just even though I think everyone who strums a guitar says maybe one day I will, whatever, but just the richness that hobby can just bring to a life just on the porch or with your family is pretty amazing. But as a practicer of Stoicism, are there any daily habits you've developed, or is it just more of a mindset that you've built, or do you actually are you Stoic on purpose?
I definitely, I consider myself a student of Stoicism rather than a Stoic practitioner. Sure. I mean, but I definitely intentionally connect with the past, with the work of all the Stoics on a daily basis. I begin my day with a journaling practice, which is to start by listing 3 gratitudes. And of course, Meditations opens up with Marcus expressing gratitude for all of his family, friends, and teachers. But those are always very simple things. It can be, what the weather is doing that day, even when the weather, by most people's definition, is crappy. And it might be as simple as, the fact that I have a cup to put my coffee in, or a tap that provides clean water. After I list my 3 gratitudes, I write my to-do list, and my to-do list is very intentionally I'm not one of those people that writes things like brush your teeth, go to the gym, and eat lunch. Those are things that will get done whether they're listed or not. I'm very goal driven, and I keep my goals very short term because I know the vision I have for the world that I want to help bring about. And I am just thinking about the sequential steps that will help me move toward that, knowing that I probably won't get there. And so my to-do list is just whatever things that I could do that day that might move me into that possibility. And I then select the one thing that if I do it will propel me the furthest and the fastest, and I make sure that one gets done first. And I also end my day with a journaling practice where, which again comes right from Marcus's practice, where I simply reflect on the day and list an achievement or an unexpected, happenstance or gift of some sort, and then also a challenge opportunity, something that I learned because things didn't go the way that I wanted or expected, that sort of thing. And those practices help me kind of get grounded at the beginning and at the end of my day. And then throughout the day, I definitely am practicing presence and mindfulness. And Stoicism is the system that I use to bring myself back, and try to live a life that's contemplative, but where I'm doing things and not just thinking big thoughts, and where I'm also kind of maintaining my equanimity and my tranquility and my sense of joy and presence.
All excellent goals to have. Things I'm working on. I'm not always good at a lot of those, but try.
it's we're all works in progress.
Exactly. As I see, we're climbing that mountain. We may not ever see the view from the peak, but the point is to die higher up the side than you started. Now, naive question from me. I'm a occasional open mic kind of guitarist, right? I'm sure in your career you have had audiences that were at best indifferent when you sat up on stage, right?
Absolutely.
I'm sure Stoicism could help you to keep your cool and do what you want to do, even when one person does that.
The sound of one fan clapping.
Yes, yeah. Can you speak to that at all? Because I've been in situations where I build those cigar box guitars, and at this flea market they said, well, we should come play them, and then people can see how. And so I've gone to play, and there's people talking and hardly paying attention. One person might say, hey, that was good, and that's about all the feedback you get. And I'm obviously not an amazing musician, but I could see that kind of ragging on your ego and just on your, even on your, perhaps if you let it, it could affect the quality of your playing in the moment if that's where your mind was going. How do you handle those situations?
Stoicism is very much a philosophy tied to what we now call design thinking. It's, what's it for? What's the purpose of this thing that I'm doing? And I learned really early on that music is about connection, collaboration, communication, and that the music itself, the ability to make music is its own reward, and that you are not necessarily entitled to the fruits of your labor. And so, when you are in a career as a musician, I mean, most working musicians are not Eric Clapton,
right?
And they're not playing in, theaters and civic centers and stadiums. They're playing in crappy blues bars and far-flung places like I did. So for me, it was, sometimes the gig is just your wallpaper, and that's the gig. And so you play that gig, and sometimes you make a connection that you did not expect. But you're able to appreciate that connection. It helped me, having this, sense that of what music was for. I was always trying to connect as opposed to get attention. There was a point maybe early in my career where I wanted the attention, so I would do ridiculous things like play the guitar behind my head or do some bar walking or table dancing, and that kind of shtick just never felt right. And so because it didn't felt right, I just stopped doing it. And what I found was that you can actually often just be yourself, and people will connect with you because you're simply being transparent about who you are and what you are, and the fact that you love what you do, and that that you care about the audience experience. And I would say, you've been very self-deprecating about your own talents. I'm not the world's greatest guitar player, and I'm not the world's greatest singer, and I'm not the world's greatest front man or entertainer, but I do each of those things well enough to at least appear that I know what the hell I'm doing. and I'm a professional, and that's the other thing about Stoicism is it's very much about understanding who you are and what your role is. And I probably owe my success as a musician and my ability to keep myself booked to the number of times I played places, more than once, and in some cases, had extended decades-long relationships with places that I played, because I did what I was supposed to do, and I was respectful of the owners, the booking agent, the audience, and myself. And I made sure I surrounded myself with professionals when I was in situations where I was with a band. I just, Elvis called it taking care of business. But Marcus would say doing the work that you were born to do.
I know Epictetus talks about specifically, like, is it lyre or lute players? I forget, focusing on worrying about the response more so than their own performance. Like, you can play it fine in your bedroom, but when you get in front of the stage, you're worried too much about the opinions of those out there. Now, you want to put on your role as musician is to do your best for them, but you can't control then what they do with that. And
exactly.
And of course, easier said than done still. We are social animals, and my wife has a theory that normally when you have a sea of eyeballs looking at you, it means you're about to be eaten. And so so stage fright can kick in certain situations. Oddly enough, I didn't get to use Stoicism to help overcome this just experience, but playing guitar or just speaking in front of a crowd terrified me in college. I shake and got nervous. It was terrible. But then I had to speak at scientific conferences doing research and things. And then I had to teach every single day as a student. And I became desensitized to that stress. So I'm sure some of those aspects you just learn to brush off as well. And then you can apply a philosophy to it
well, that's actually worth sticking a pin in, just because it speaks to the role that Stoicism has played in cognitive behavioral therapy and REBT. But this idea, Stoicism helps us contextualize our place and what we're doing, and it also helps us decatastrophize situations, because we spend so much time living in our head, and because we're so very concerned about ourselves, it's very easy to take ourselves and whatever's going on far more seriously than it really deserves. That the idea behind CBT is that it's through the repeated engagement with increasing levels of stressful situations that we learn to be less freaked out by the lower levels of whatever we're doing. So I think Stoicism should probably be a course at Berkeley and Juilliard and Musicians Institute and everywhere else, because it certainly has helped me keep things in perspective and help me experience more kind of equanimity and well-being on stage, which is not something that I know almost every musician I know struggles or has struggled with that.
I know in the book, is it The Practical Stoic by Ward Farnsworth? I might get the title slightly wrong, but he likens Stoicism to a way to kind of artificially become a veteran at something, because you can think about it in a logical way, like the doctor who's been a doctor for 1,000 years. If they lose a patient, they will still care in that sense, but it won't be like the first time they won't. They'll say, this is what happens to life. This is a thing that happens. I will accept it. But you can kind of become a veteran by thinking about things logically and then practicing them in your head, and when they happen in reality, you have a little more, you're a little more poised to accept it with equanimity, I guess. So talk to us a bit then. So we can use Stoicism in a stressful situation, playing music to a crowd that maybe doesn't care, or a new situation you've never been in. But let's talk about the intersection of creativity and Stoicism. You not only play, you are a songwriter as well, and you collaborate with others. How might Stoicism benefit the creative mind?
Well, I think so. Stoicism is really built on two truths that we've learned are true about human beings. The first is that we're the only creatures on this planet anyways that has the capacity for reason or rationality. And we have this capacity for reason, and we use it most of the time to rationalize our poorly chosen beliefs and actions. But the fact of the matter is that we do have this ability to think and to change our minds. And the other thing that Stoicism is built upon is that we are inherently social creatures. And Marcus speaks of this all the time. It's played out in Stoicism in terms of cosmopolitanism, and that we are part of a much bigger whole. Not only are we part of the human family, but we're part of this Earth's collection of living things, but also we have a place in the cosmos. So I think those two things are really profound and are one of the reasons why Stoicism has lasted so long. But the other piece for me is that that goes along with these two things is that we are born with this creative impulse and this creative instinct. And it's the way that creativity is just the way that we change things. And so one of the things that's very distressing to me is when I do workshops or give talks and I ask people to raise their hand if they think they're creative. And then if I then ask the rest of the audience who here is not creative, it's the not creatives at least equal those that self-identify as creatives. And that's untrue. And it's sad that people think it's true, because it was through creativity that you went from being a non-talker to being a talker. It's through creativity that you went from being a non-walker to a walker. And it's through creativity that you feed yourself every day, that you are engaged in conversations and relationships and so forth. And so to me, the creativity piece, although it's not frequently discussed overtly in the Stoic literature, it is mentioned. But it's an inherent part of being a human being as well. And so Stoicism is, however, a philosophy about the art of living well. And for me, that just automatically includes creativity, because if you are going to live well, you are going to have to tap into your creative capacity. And so all the things about Stoicism that I love, the idea that things need to be done with and on and for a purpose of some sort, that our work has to be done in service to others, that it must be done with compassion and empathy and acceptance, that sometimes it will not be received the way that we wish it would be received, and sometimes it will be ignored or criticized or hated, but that we have the capacity to experience joy and meaning in any kind of work we do when we recognize that we have the ability to frame our situation, and then we have the ability to choose what we do next. And when we make those choices make those choices with intention and based on our values and integrity, then generally we can always be experiencing Stoic joy, equanimity, tranquility, well-being, however you want to, whatever adjective you want to frame it. eudaimonia, which is, the best translation that I've ever heard is human flourishing. You can literally live a flourishing life in any situation, and Plato proved that you can even do that on your way out on your deathbed. I think for that reason, I think one of the reasons that Stoicism is kind of reflourishing or is experiencing kind of a revitalization right now is because we live in very challenging, difficult times, and Stoicism was born of difficult times, and it's a philosophy that teaches us that we can still live a life of meaning and thriving even when everything seems everything is out of our control, other than our thoughts and actions, and that we don't have, that the secret to our happiness comes from within ourselves. So I'm not sure I answered your question.
I think you did.
So.
I think you did. That was an elegant and eloquent answer. I was just thinking of what you said when we first started on that question, was about folks not raising their hand when you asked, "Are you a creative?" I think of my dad. Mm-hmm. He was a car mechanic and worked at Huffy Bicycles, building bicycles, and then till they went under and moved to China eventually. And he farms, and he does all these different things, but he doesn't consider himself to be creative. But I think of how he solves problems when working on a piece of farm equipment. He hears a noise and he thinks, oh, it could be this, or this. What kind of test could I come up with to figure out which one it is? And, he can, it's basically science. He just doesn't know it. And he's creating ways to solve the problem, and he'll make a part when one doesn't exist, and yet he'd say, well, I'm not creative. It's like, it's a high form of creativity as far as I can tell.
Well, so I'll tell you a quick funny story about one of your past guests, who was the very first guest on my podcast. Massimo Pigliucci had just written his book, How to Be a Stoic. Came on my show, I'm sure, just because he just had written a book and he needed to shout it from the mountaintops wherever, and mine was much more of a molehill at that point. I remember him saying in our broadcast together, "I'm not really a creative person." And I said, "Massimo, you just wrote a book." I think anybody would call that, but it's funny how, in my work with Seth Godin, we have a program called the Marketing Seminar, and we define marketing as simply telling true stories to people that need to hear them so that their lives will be enhanced by colliding with your work. And the stories that we tell ourselves and the stories we tell others are what inform our sense of well-being. And this is all Stoicism really is learning to tell ourselves truer stories and telling truer stories to others so that we can all live happier, healthier lives. Yeah, I mean, your story of your dad is so poignant and beautiful, because my wife's grandfather was a farmer and felt the exact same way. And I remember working with him on the farm and working on equipment and watching him plan what he was going to plant that season or that year, and the way that he figured out how to keep the hogs safe and how to, I mean, he was a brilliant creative thinker. That, if you had asked him, would have probably tossed you out of the house for even suggesting, that he could be such a thing. So yeah, interesting. The stories we tell ourselves are always deeply fascinating to me.
Yeah. We're just trying. We can tell ourselves all kinds of things. The goal is to make our stories closer and closer to reality, and that's hard sometimes when you're uncertain what reality is, but you're trying to grope for it and figure it out. So then, putting that all together, why don't you tell us a bit about the work you've mentioned it here and there, the work you're involved in then. So you for example, your Creative on Purpose is one of your projects. Why don't you tell us a bit about that?
So Creative on Purpose, again, is just a website dedicated or a platform dedicated to helping people fly higher in endeavors that make a difference. And those endeavors that make a difference are endeavors that enhance your life by elevating the lives of others. So we're talking basically about meaningful work and what that looks and feels like. It's not a site dedicated to figuring out your dream career or how to make $1 million doing what what you're passionate about. It's the idea that, an endeavor is I define it as the work you're meant to do now. And that might be improving your relationship as a husband, as a father or mother. It might as so your relationship as a spouse or a parent or a friend or a neighbor, but it could also be your side hustle, which might be a musical kind of amateur career or semi-pro career. It might be writing. It might be some sort of arts and crafts, a passion project, a side hustle. Maybe you're nearing retirement and want to think about a second or third career, or maybe you want to switch careers. It's just this idea that we have a much better chance of stepping into work that provides us with a greater sense of fulfillment and well-being if we approach finding that work with making sure that we're very clear on who we are, what we do, and where we belong. And I define those three things as: who we are is what your core values are, your guiding principles. What you do is based on your talents, your soft skills, and the skills that you've learned along the way. And then belonging or where you belong is your tribe, people that share your values and need your talents to enhance their lives in some way. And if you think of that as a 3-circle Venn diagram, the work and endeavor lies at the intersection of those three things. And if you approach it in that way, you have a much better chance of finding something that, whether or not it earns you a living, it will provide you with a sense of living well. And, I don't necessarily tie that kind of work to status or prosperity or, the usual things that we, think that we want from work. But I find that oftentimes our best chance of marrying our occupation with our vocation and with our passion is when we're doing things that mean something to us and therefore will mean something to other people. So right now, the work that I have several books. Most of them are handbooks in the tradition of Epictetus that are just about how to find meaningful work, how to do that work better, and how to do that work forever.
I have one on my Kindle.
Fantastic. So the most recent book is called Endeavor.
Oh yeah, that's great.
And that provides the process that I just kind of sketched out, and it provides some tools and concepts for doing that better. Literally any day now there will be another book that's just called Creative on Purpose, and that's probably going to be offered for free on the website and for $1 on Amazon really soon, and that will be in 38 pages or less. Just all about what I just was talking about in terms of what Creative on Purpose is about.
Great. I have one. I forget. It had Stoicism or Stoic in the title. I forget the title off the top of my head. You'll know.
The Stoic Creative. That was my very first.
The very first one. I download. You had a sale or something you posted about, so I grabbed that. I've thumbed through and I've enjoyed it, but I haven't read it cover to cover yet. But luckily, it's not like trying to get through Seneca. I should be able to handle it, I hope. But that's awesome that you get to do all that. I was thinking of what you're saying, and then thinking about my own life and how does this apply. And first of all, I can see a lot of connections to Stoicism in what you're doing then, because, for example, the roles of Epictetus. What are your roles? What are your obligations? Are you doing things that contribute to the whole of society? And there's a lot there that kind of goes towards that eudaimonic lifestyle. but also just thinking in my own life as a teacher. I mean, I can teach fairly uncreative. I can be as creative as I want to be, I guess. I could just read the book at people, as sometimes happens, unfortunately, in the classroom. But I try to, I actually have written songs about biological topics and the things like that. My biggest downloaded YouTube video, or watched YouTube video, I should say, is me doing a bad Louis Armstrong impression, singing about how plants have sex.
Fantastic.
It's got like 30,000 views on YouTube. That's my one weird contribution to the world.
It's awesome.
Even this podcast, it's just, I don't want to do it because of feedback, but every now and then I get emails come in and say, hey, this podcast really helped me get through a challenge in life, and thinking, okay, it's not just me rattling off into a mic. People are listening, and some people are being affected for the better for it, which is a good feeling as well, even though I can't control whether that happens or not. But when it does happen, it's nice, and I can see perhaps some of the goals in your work kind of meshing with my jibber jabber there that I've been going on about. But that's really great. Then what is this? You talked about Seth Godin, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
What is that work?
So Seth Godin maybe is best known for his best-selling book years ago called Purple Cow, which is kind of a new way of thinking about marketing. That was written back in the time when marketing was simply advertising, which was basically spamming people through television ads to get them to buy crappy shit they didn't need it. But his work over time has moved more into the educational space. He has several online programs. The Alt MBA is a program that's targeted at helping people kind of level up in endeavors that matter to them. And that was I've taken every single one of his programs, or coached in every single one of his programs, except for one called The Business of Food. But I coach currently in 3 of his programs: the marketing seminar, which just got started in its 7th session. Then there's one called the Bootstrappers Workshop and another called the Freelancers Workshop. And hopefully those titles are somewhat self-explanatory. And my job as a coach is, Seth is a brilliant man who has devised processes that work, and he has built communities that facilitate those processes. And as a coach, my job is to protect and promote the process and the community, and help people get from where they are to where they want to go as either marketers or freelancers or bootstrappers or what have you. So it's some of the most meaning. I've been a school teacher for a short period of time. I have my own guitar studio. I've been a professional musician for most of my life. All things I'm very proud of, all things I have loved to do, and I feel grateful and lucky to have done them. But the work that I'm doing with Seth for right now is amongst the most impactful and meaningful that I've ever had. And of course, the work I'm doing at Creative on Purpose also, that's work I would do whether or not I was getting paid to do it. So to me, that's the mark of meaningful work. If it's something that excites you and energizes you, regardless of outcome, then it's work that's worth your time and talents.
So if people want to know more about what you do, want to connect up with you, how should they do that?
Well, it used to be that you could Google Scott Perry and I would show right up, but now we have a House of Representative from Pennsylvania by that name and a professional basketball coach by that name. I don't know why a politician or a basketball player would knock a musician out of first place, but they have. But if you were to put Creative on Purpose in a Google search, my website and my name will show up, and the actual domain name is Be Creative on Purpose. And if you go there, there's all sorts of goodness that you can download for free just to get started getting introduced to my work. And of course, I'm always interested in going deeper with folks. So if you would like to connect there, that's the best place. I do have social media accounts that I plan on not being on for much longer.
I understand.
But if that's your jam, you can still catch me there while you can.
Now, can they find your music via Creative on Purpose as well?
My music is probably easiest found on CD Baby or iTunes.
Okay.
You can hear it in the background of some of the things that are on Creative on Purpose, but that work has very little to do with my career as a musician or a music teacher, so it's not there.
I got you. Excellent. Well, Scott, thank you for joining the podcast this week. It was very informative, and I hope folks will check it out. By the way, I have the album I'm Happy Now. I believe that was the one at the time that had come out recently. I highly recommend it, and I'm highly jealous of the awesome finger picking and blues slide guitar coming out of that album. I still listen to it today, almost 20 years later. So check it out, and check out Creative on Purpose. And Scott, thanks for joining us.
Really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and reconnect, Steve. And I actually was connected to your website before you, or to your podcast rather, before you connected with me to be on the podcast. So, you've been doing great work. It has been making a difference. You have had at least one fan clapping for you. I'm sure there's many more. So thank you so much for the work that you're doing and the difference that you're making, and for the chance to speak with you today.
All right. Thanks a lot. Carpe diem. All right. Let me stop the video. Hold on. Let me figure out how to stop the video. Okay. Anyway, great. Thank you. Do you perform in your home area or do you do any performing?
Yeah. So when I moved to Southwest Virginia almost 20 years ago, I intended to retire, but then didn't. So I wasn't able to one of the reasons to move to this area is to raise my family. My boys were 9 and 4 when we moved here.
Okay.
So I, promised that I would only play locally, and there's a lot of musicians.
There's mine right now.
Awesome. Don't blink. It goes by quick. My oldest is 29. My youngest is 25.
Wow.
But yeah, so I performed, I did the local guitar, local musician thing, playing mostly, 3 or 4 days a week, which is not enough to live on. So that's when I started teaching, and I discovered that teaching is actually something I love even more than performing. And then I guess about 2 years ago, when I kind of got started with Creative on Purpose and working for Seth, I didn't have to perform anymore. And what I found was I didn't feel like I had to perform anymore. I felt like I'd kind of ridden that pony as far as it was going to take me. And so I literally have one group of guys that I perform with now. I call it the Band of Geezers. And we're mostly a rock and roll outfit, which is something I never have played before.
So are you electric in that then?
Yeah. So, and I've had electric bands before, but they've been a hardcore blues band. So we play blues, we play some country, we play a little bit of jazz. But it's I'm the youngest guy in the band. There's no ego stupidity. There's no dream delusions of grandeur.
Right.
There's a bunch of old hippies in this town that love us, and we love them. And so for me, that's kind of enough in terms of, having a musical outlet. I literally only pick up my guitar to teach and when I have a gig. And, I teach at a guitar camp with Martin Taylor and Frank Vignola, two of the best guitar players on the planet. And the only reason I'm there is because I'm not a great guitar player, but I am a great teacher. So I'm able to help, these guys that are geniuses, but can't describe what they're doing. I help that. I bridge the gap. But I can foresee even giving that up. Maybe I'm contemplating that this might be the last year that I make that trip. And, it's interesting how people decide that the way they met you is the way that you will always be. Because people ask me all the time, how come I never see you playing anywhere anymore? And I say, I don't play anymore. And they're like, well, what do you do? I say, well, I actually have other interests.
Well, yeah, well, that's too bad because it was. I still remember the gig all that while ago, a while ago. But
I remember you and your friends. I remember the table. And
I was there by myself.
Okay, so maybe you.
But
you were
there
part
were
of the group
people
that I
around
remember.
me, probably. Yeah.
Yeah, well, your story was really deeply touching to me because, I remember that night not feeling like I was really getting over. Like, I remember feeling like this is just not working.
Not clicking or,
like I didn't feel, and, because many, many times in my career, I've ended up in places where they probably wanted a band, not, the lonely guy sitting.
I think of the Blues. I think of the Blues Brothers at the country bar.
Yeah. We have both kinds. So I gotta jump off to get to my teaching gig, but whenever this is gonna get released, let me know because I'll boost it to my mailing list and I'll put it out on the evil empire that is social media. We'll get some more ears and eyeballs.
Sounds good.
I'll
probably, if I can, I'll get it up this Sunday because I don't have anything else recorded for this Sunday yet.
Oh,
so
cool.
I don't want to sit on it for too long. So, well, Scott, it was a pleasure once again to say howdy to you and take care. And I hope everything goes great.
Yeah, we'll stay in touch for sure. Absolutely.
Sounds good. See ya.
All right. Appreciate
Thank you
it.
for listening to The Sunday Stoic. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review The Sunday Stoic on iTunes. Become a member of the Sunday Stoic team, earn rewards, and be an integral part of the show by becoming a patron at www.patreon.com/SundayStoic. Contact the show by emailing sundaystoic@gmail.com or by leaving a voicemail at 501-503-3132. To find out more, visit www.sundaystoicpodcast.com. And as Steve always says, carpe diem.